Hello, team. Welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video. Myself, Jonathan M.S. Pierce. This is a Ukraine war news update, sort of geopolitical peace negotiations latest update. We are sort of packing up at the moment to go back home from our holidays. So if there is some noise in the background, that is due to cases being packed and whatnot. Apologies, so on and so forth. We're going to start with we're going to go through basically the last 24 hours, ending with a press conference which has taken place this afternoon, my time, which was another pretty astonishing press conference from Donald Trump. Quite a lot to talk about there. So first of all, CNN reported that Trump and Putin will meet at the Elmendorf Richardson, a US military base in Anchorage, chosen as the most secure venue despite White House reluctance to host the Russian delegation on American military ground. So a bit of controversy there, but still that's where it is happening. What else? We hear from Caroline Levitt that the largest city in Alaska will host a bilateral summit, Anchorage, that is, between Trump and Putin, while the White House acknowledged that, quote, only one side participating in this war will be present, so Zelensky will not be there. Trump has then subsequently said that he will speak with Zelensky with Putin thereafter at some point in the future, I presume, or I don't know if that is due to be at this in this time frame, or he's also said, or maybe I won't be there. It will just be Putin and Zelensky, but I'm there if they need me, type thing. Then we go on to hear that today there was a big video conference call between Ukraine's allies and the White House. So Trump has spoken to European leaders. In fact, he's quite positive about speaking to the European leaders. Zelensky arrived also in Berlin, and he had press conferences with Friedrich Merz and whatnot. He's looking quite tired, actually, Zelensky, understandably so. That's been the kind of background. Trump here saying on True Social will be speaking to European leaders in a short while. They are great people who want to see a deal done. So this is a rare moment of positivity towards Europe and its leaders. We heard this previously after he came back from a NATO summit where he is like, these leaders really care about their countries. They're good people and whatnot, as if that was some kind of major surprise for him. But anyway, that's what he announced on True Social. And then we go on to hear him speak again on Truth Social. And this was a typical Trump kind of weird comment. So, in full, he said, very unfair media is at work on my meeting with Putin, constantly quoting fired losers and really dumb people like John Bolton, that's his former national security advisor, whom he fired in Trump 1.0, who just said that even though the meeting is on American soil, Putin has already won. Quote, Putin has already won. That's a John Bolton quote, supposedly. What's that all about, says Trump. We are winning on all caps, everything. The fake news is working overtime. No tax on overtime. Very good. If I got Moscow and Leningrad free as part of the deal with Russia, the fake news would say that I made a bad deal. But now they've been caught. Okay, I'm going to pause here because Trump has included the word Leningrad here, the town Leningrad. Leningrad doesn't exist, as in that's no longer the name of the city in Russia, and it hasn't been for some time. So this is a really weird thing for Trump to have said. And there have been many people claiming, and we're going to talk about this in a wee while. Financial Times came out to declare that there's no one with any Russian or Ukrainian expertise in Trump's administration at the moment advising him. Obviously, you've got Kellogg hanging around, but he's not really at the center of things, and he's not like massively knowledgeable, I don't think. Although his daughter is his daughter or granddaughter, Megan Mobs, is it working in Kiev at the moment. But anyway, point being is that he's got no great knowledge of Russia or Ukraine, and nor does anyone around him. And here he is spouting, talking about Leningrad. It's just, absolutely bizarre. Anyway, if I got Moscow and Leningrad free as part of the deal with Russia, the fake news would say that I made a bad deal, but now they've been caught. Look at all of the real news that's coming out about their corruption. They are sick and dishonest people who probably hate our country, but it doesn't matter because we are winning on everything. MAGA. So just a typical rant from an unhinged Trump, by the sounds of it. So here we are, the Financial Times article, Christopher Miller here from the FT saying, quoting from the article, "It's safe to say that Trump does not have a single policy-making person who knows Russia and Ukraine advising him," said Eric Rubin, a former career diplomat who served as US ambassador to Bulgaria during Trump's first term. So there's a lot of talk about this at the moment. I've been mentioning this for a long time. I have very clearly said Trump knows nothing about Ukraine or Russia. In fact, he knows very little about geopolitics in general. He doesn't do any reading, doesn't take intelligence briefings. Where can you find the requisite knowledge about world political events if you don't read? If you only listen to your advisors around you giving you snippets here and snippets there, like he just has a complete lack of knowledge, a fundamental ignorance of the things he needs to know, considering he is doing the job of being president of the United States. It is absolutely horrific. And in fact, we're going to see some more analysis along those lines in a second. So just remember this, because, here's a man who is at the heart of negotiating. I don't want to say on behalf of, he's negotiating Ukraine away with Russia, and about Ukraine without Ukraine. Zelensky will not be at this meeting, a bilateral meeting between him and Putin, and he just doesn't have the knowledge. Financial Times: no experts in the room. Donald Trump to meet Vladimir Putin after loss of Russia specialists. Next interprets this by saying there are no Russian or Ukraine experts among senior officials in the US administration, the FT reports. Outlet writes that Washington has entrusted negotiations with Moscow to Stephen Witkoff, who has little foreign policy experience, while specialists on the region have previously been sidelined. It is just bad news, I think, in general. So now we're going to go to the rest of politics and listen to Alistair Campbell and Rory Stewart for a good few minutes talk about these matters. And I think they do a pretty good job. To be honest, I could play you a good half an hour of this. It's a fantastic conversation between the two. But we're just going to play some, I don't know, probably 5 minutes or so from this discussion. Let's hear it.
Watching some of his comments, and I think it's really important with Trump, as you say, to kind of try to separate out from when he goes on these weird, mad weaves and rambles, and when actually he's saying something that seems to fit with the position that he's held. The position that he's held, reinforced by Vance, who seems to hold the position even more strongly, is that basically we're on Russia's side in this war. And then lay in with that this absolute obsession with wanting a Nobel Peace Prize. And if you think about these two leaders, so they decided on Alaska, and of course Alaska has its own amazing symbolism in this, because Alaska used to be Russia, and then when Alexander II was in deep trouble financially, they sold it to America for just over $7 million in 1867. And then, of course, the other kind of historical element, you talked about wizardry. Let's just pretend that Trump maybe did think these things through. Alaska, obvious resonance. The other word that keeps coming up in the massive build-up to this meeting is Yalta, where Roosevelt, Stalin and Churchill got together and said, right, we're the big powers, we'll carve up the world. And of course, what's perfect for Putin is this idea that he and Trump are coming together to decide what to tell Europe is going to happen to a major part of Europe. And of course, the reason why Yalta is so resonant is because it's part of Crimea, which is also kind of on the table in terms of the bits of land. And of course, this quote really, first of all, something Trump said yesterday, he said,
I'm going to see Putin. I'm going to Russia on Friday.
He's getting on a bit. We know that. Just imagine if Joe Biden had said that. I'm going to Russia. I mean, it's barely landed. And the second thing, he said, Rory, try and unpick this one for me. We're going to get some back and we're going to get some switched. There'll be some swapping of territories to the betterment of both. Who is we? We're going to get some back. Who is we?
Well, it's really good. I like the who's we, because, of course, the big missing party in all of this is Ukraine. Ukraine, who have suffered at least 400,000 casualties, who've been fighting this horrifying war, who were invaded, who had their territory taken from them, that continues to be occupied, and who are not invited to the table. And of course, quite understandably, the Ukrainians and when the Europeans occasionally develop a backbone, the Europeans who sometimes make mild comments about this, are terrified that Trump doesn't do a big summit with Putin, particularly when the Russian president's been out in the cold for years now. No American president's met him. So as you say, for Nobel Peace Prize reasons, ego reasons, he's going to want to come out with a deal.
Yeah.
So all the cards, again, are on Putin's side. Because Putin, and the other figure, I guess, is Benjamin Netanyahu, who you get the sense there's nothing Trump will ever actually really do to punish him. He may criticize him or complain, but he's never going to impose tariffs on him. He's never going to do anything of that sort.
You said last week about, he's always got this 2 weeks thing, and he talked recently about, in 10 to 12 days, he's going to put these secondary sanctions on Putin. Well, of course, we've passed the 10 to 12 days, but now he's got a different chapter in the reality TV show, which is the big one in Alaska. Who's going to talk to him about 10 to 12 days of the sanctions when he's got this massive event where Putin's flying in on a 9-hour flight that way and he's coming up from Washington on a 7-hour flight that way? We don't even know yet where they're actually going to meet. The whole thing, just imagine, look, I'm not Ukrainian and I'm not remotely involved in these discussions, but even I, at the moment, I'm waking up feeling a little bit sick about what's going to happen. Just imagine what Zelensky's feeling like. He's got his country on the table where Putin is basically the main voice alongside Trump. And in this ramble yesterday, there was only one person in this equation that he criticized yesterday, and that was Zelensky. He said, I get on fine with Zelensky, but I really disagree with him. This war should never have started. What does that even mean when he says that? This war should never have started.
It's really disturbing. And as you say, the lack of details are revealing. There's this lovely analogy that you've found there with Alaska. And of course, you could extend it to Greenland, which is another territory, which obviously he hopes that he can buy in the way that the United States bought Alaska, and another enormous territory that a bit like Alaska, full of minerals that he could add to his country. But the other detail thing, which I thought was quite revealing, it's a small moment, but you might have picked up that when Pete Hegseth was speaking recently about NATO, it turned out that he didn't know anything about Kaliningrad. Didn't know.
So this is fascinating. So not only have they just said, look, there's a fundamental lack of detail from Trump about these matters, but then when it comes to Pete Hegseth, he doesn't know what Kaliningrad is. Like if you are in charge of the DoD, if you are the Secretary of Defense and you don't know what Kaliningrad is, then you don't understand the Russian nuclear threat to Europe. You don't understand the dynamics of security within Europe, which is a massive thing for you to be needing to know. I mean, you are responsible for being in charge of NATO Europe, the United States, right? Like if you are the Secretary of Defense and you don't know Kaliningrad, what level of ignorance is there right at the heart of the administration? It is absolutely staggering.
Where it was. Now, the reason why that matters, it sounds like a small thing, but actually, given that the central security question, probably of our age, is Russia's threat to Europe, Russia's threat to Ukraine, Russia's threat to the Baltics. And Kaliningrad, this tiny little bit of Russian territory deep into Europe, is going to be central to that. It was very interesting that Hegseth, apparently 6 months into the job, 7 months into the job, hadn't been briefed on it, wasn't even remotely familiar with it. That would have been very unusual with previous American defense secretaries who, for all their flaws, were always, I found in my experience, unbelievably well briefed. I mean, talking to American defense secretaries or secretaries of state, boy, were they briefed. Boy, could they do the talk.
Rory Stewart is coming at that from a previous minister himself. So he, or secretary even, himself in the UK government. So he has dealt with these people at the levels you would expect.
Talking points, Kerry could always drop names of towns in Afghanistan and talk about Pashtun Tajik divisions because he sat through endless briefings.
Was this the Senate or the Congress hearing? Because I saw one where Hegseth eventually said, "What, are we turning this into a quiz show?" Yeah. And which of course was almost, it was like leading with his chin, because of course he is basically a Fox News presenter. But the point is, he didn't know the answer to any of these questions. And when we talked to Seth Moulton on leading, he made the point, and I'm sure this is right, that people at the top of the military, they see the guy as a joke. There was a very, very funny moment, Rory, yesterday when Trump was standing.
So anyway, and they go on to talk about other things. But in fact, the next 10 minutes is absolutely fascinating. But there's this fundamental lack of knowledge at the center of the Trump administration, both in the Department of Defense, right at the very top, and with Trump himself. So now we're going to go to James O'Brien on LBC. He's like my spirit brother or something, James O'Brien. We're so similar in all of our beliefs and thoughts about the world. Honestly, everything he says, I am just always nodding in agreement. And here he talks about Ukraine and the meeting and the press conference and whatnot. And again, spot on. We're just only going to dip into this, but honestly, listen to the whole thing. It's really worth it.
The reason why it's back in the spotlight today has very little to do with what is happening on the ground in Ukraine, and everything to do with the fact that Donald Trump is set to meet his hero in Alaska on Friday, Vladimir Putin, and seek, well, what exactly? A distraction from the continuing Epstein scandal back home in America, I suspect. I don't know that Donald Trump is in a position to do anything at all. 24 hours, was it? He said he'd have it fixed on the campaign trail. He'd have this war finished within on the first day back in power. And then he has a meeting and Vladimir Putin says things to him. And he comes out doing a lap of honor, Donald Trump, that is. And 10 minutes later, Vladimir Putin sends more missiles into Ukraine and makes an absolute mockery of whatever it was that Donald Trump thought that he had achieved in the first place. Excuse me. The bit I can't quite get my head around even now is the contempt with which he speaks of Volodymyr Zelensky. Not just, of course, the contempt with which he speaks about him, but the utter contempt with which he speaks to him, most obviously when he turned up in the White House. The best way to understand this is to boil it down to almost primeval, atavistic behaviour. Donald Trump honestly believes that bullies should prevail. So that if
100%, and I really appreciate where James O'Brien goes here, because I've long said he's just basically a big playground bully that goes around getting what he wants. And Americans might look at that and say, this is brilliant, he's doing great stuff for us, but he's doing that by bullying other people and by bullying allies, and he just has no time for alliances and for relationships with nations who are aligned with the ideals of the United States. And that's why he talks about European leaders by saying, with surprise, that these are good people. Comes back from NATO, go, you wouldn't believe it, they actually really care about their nation. Yeah. Not everyone is a competitor and an enemy, and he sees all of his allies as enemies, and he sees all of the other bullies of the world as people to look up to. So he appreciates Vladimir Putin, Xi Jinping, Kim Jong-un, their power. He wants that. He wants to be those people. He wants to have what they have.
If the big boy at school demands your dinner money, then you are an idiot if you do not give it to him. I do think sometimes it can be that simple. You are an idiot if you do not give him your dinner money. If you go to the teacher to complain, you are an idiot. If you seek to muster together a group of friends that might be able to resist the bully, you are an idiot. If you do anything other than recognize the, quote, natural, end quote, order of things, then you are an idiot. I am bigger than you, and I want all your money. Certainly, sir. Here it is. Because the clip from yesterday that I couldn't really get my head around was still, even now, having witnessed so much of it, was the bit about how Zelensky had got everything wrong. I can't believe he did what he did, said Trump. I'll find the clip.
And this is exactly the part that I was exacerbated about. I was exasperated about, sorry is the correct word, last night when I did my previous video. So hear it out here.
For you in the next few minutes, or rather Eleanor will. But the idea that he looked at the illegal invasion of Ukraine by a murderous despot, a genocidal maniac, and decided that the people resisting it were the wrong ones in this piece. I think it's worth pausing here for a minute, isn't it? It's worth pausing here just for a nanosecond. You watch an illegal invasion of sovereign territory, which is expected to unfold almost seamlessly. They were expecting to have a Kremlin puppet installed in Kyiv by the end of that opening weekend. The scale and the strength of the Ukrainian resistance, I think, shocked everybody except Ukrainians, probably even shocked some of them. And Trump's position remains that Zelensky should have legged it, should have rolled over, should have bent, surrendered, acquiesced. And Trump, either can't forgive him for that or simply can't understand it, can't understand the defiance of that so-called natural order. And here we are now. Years later, 3 years later, give or take, here we are now looking at a changed map with Russian forces successfully repelled in the northeast of the country and still camped on the southeastern borders. Donetsk is still, and of course Crimea, which was already still under Russian control. And now Donald Trump turns up on Friday to tell Putin what? I don't even know. So what question do we ask today? I wonder whether the West has made a terrible mistake by leaving Donald Trump in charge. I wonder whether it should have been clearer. Whether or not we had the capacity to do it or not, I do not know. But I do know that the Financial Times reports this morning a tripling in speed of Europe's production of weapons. The weapons factories of Europe are expanding at 3 times the rate of peacetime. 7 million square metres of new industrial development that represents rearmament on a historic scale. It's gone into overdrive since that full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022. The FT has looked at radar satellite data covering 150 facilities across 37 companies. This is a defence revival, the likes of which many thought we would never see. Most obviously that American historian Francis Fukuyama, who wrote about the end of history when the Berlin Wall came down, that liberalism had triumphed over communism and there was no way that we would ever return to the sort of standoff of the Cold War. This is not policy rhetoric or pledges. This is concrete and steel. And it comes as EU governments argue over how to sustain armed deliveries to Kyiv. And who here knows enough to answer the question of whether or not Europe has an inalienable moral duty to protect the Ukrainian people if Donald Trump decides to take his ball home, if Donald Trump continues upon a path of diminishing and diluting US support for Ukraine, continues upon a path of praising and sweet-talking Vladimir Putin while insulting and offending Volodymyr Zelensky and by association the entire Ukrainian people. I don't think it is an exaggeration to say that he blames Zelensky for the war.
And this is what the others were saying previously.
He blames Zelensky for the war. He said yesterday, and I've got the quote in front of me, that Zelensky didn't need to go into war and kill everybody. He blames Zelensky for the war. In fact, I think you should hear it in his own inimitable tone.
And I get along with Zelensky, but, I disagree with what he's done. Very, very severely disagree. This is a war that should have never happened, wouldn't have happened. But I'll be speaking to Zelensky. The next meeting will be with Zelensky and Putin, or Zelensky and Putin and me. I'll be there if they need. But I want to have a meeting set up between the two leaders. I was a little bothered by the fact that Zelensky was saying, well, I have to get constitutional approval. I mean, he's got approval to go into war and kill everybody, but he needs approval to do a land swap because there'll be some land swapping going on. I know that through Russia and through conversations with everybody to the good.
It's an interesting point that's been made about swapping. It's like, it's not really swapping because all of that land is Ukrainian. You're swapping Ukrainian land for Ukrainian land. It's not really a land swap.
The good of Ukraine. Good stuff, not bad stuff. Also, some bad stuff for both. So there's good and there's bad. But it's very complex because you have lines that are very uneven. And there'll be some swapping. There'll be some changes in land. And the word that they will use is, they make changes. We're going to change.
The word they use is they make changes. What do you honestly?
Change the lines, the battle lines. Russia's occupied a big portion of Ukraine. They've occupied some very prime territory. We're going to try and get some of that territory back for Ukraine.
I mean, it's just... What an irredeemable idiot the man is. What's the worst thing in the world is a stupid person who's too stupid to realise how stupid they are. Thinks he's a genius. And of course, there are plenty of people who have also decided that he's a genius. I bet he can't name a single town in Ukraine. I bet he can't name a single region, a single city, a single politician beyond Volodymyr Zelensky. And there he is, blaming the leader of the invaded country for the resistance. How do you even put that into historical context? What would the equivalent be? Blaming Poland for the Nazi invasion? I don't know whether people did that at the time, whether there were sort of Lord Haw-Haws or apologists doing that kind of thing at the time, blaming Sudetenland for the annexation, blaming Poland for the invasion, blaming France. Did we blame the French when the Nazis marched on Paris? I mean, it's absolutely incredible. I mean, truly incredible that you can look at the illegal invasion of a sovereign territory and have a problem not with the invader, but with the resistance. And this is going to be dominating the news for the next few days. I think we'll...
And honestly, that just needs to be hammered home. We need to keep coming back to this, that Trump is literally victim blaming here. And he has a completely upside down moral calculation. It's just absolutely incredible. So anyway, Putin wants to take photos with President Trump and delay sanctions, and that's coming from the EU High Representative for Foreign Affairs, Kaja Kallas, on a meeting in Alaska. She's got it right. Putin's just there for photos and wants basically appeasement and to get as much as they possibly can. Kaja Kallas stated that Putin is not showing readiness for meaningful negotiations with President Trump in Alaska. Now, Sky News has reported that European allies hope for an immediate 15-day ceasefire in Ukraine, with the possibility of gradually easing sanctions on Russia if a full and longer-term truce can be agreed. So this is Sky News saying that. They hope that a 15-day ceasefire can be reached immediately. Sanctions will still be in place for this period of time before a more structured pause in fighting in Ukraine can take hold. Separately, Italian government sources have told Sky News that they'll push Donald Trump to involve Europe in the discussions with Putin over Ukraine when they speak via video call later today. He's been asking European countries to invest more on military spending, so we must be involved in these decisions, an Italian diplomat explained. Of course, now the Kiel Institute is saying that the Europeans have actually spent over double what the Americans have spent in supporting Ukraine now. So, and obviously that's a different question to spending on your defence as a percentage of GDP to qualify for NATO. The sources added during the call, Italy will underline the need for clear military, economic and political guarantees for Ukraine. Russians, though, when they've been asked about this, just the average people in the street, what they think about the meeting between President Trump and Putin in Alaska, quote, "It won't happen. Trump has already sold everything. Alaska already belongs to Russia," says one. "Putin won't give up Ukraine, Kiev, and maybe a little bit more. That's theirs, and the rest is ours." That's someone else. So, the average people appear to be fully aligned with the Russian position. Now, Kyiv Independent here reports that Ukraine is open to discussing an aerial truce with Russia. According to a Zelensky aide, quote, "Russia is unlikely to abandon the use of strategic aviation or large-scale drone deployments," Mikhailo Podolyak told Corriere della Sera. However, Ukraine is ready to discuss and consider this scenario. So that could be a potential. Ukraine's 5 demands, supposedly for the end of the war, are this. 1, a durable ceasefire before any territorial talks, no concessions on borders, no withdrawal from Donbass. So your ceasefire first, we talked about this previously. And number 2, security guarantees, path to NATO, EU, sustained Western military aid, no forced demilitarization. So they need to be able to get into the EU and NATO without hindrance from Russia, and they need sustained military aid, and they cannot reduce the size of their armed forces. 3, Russian reparations. So Russia needs to pay hundreds of billions in damages using frozen Russian assets. 4, the return of abducted children and POWs, 20,000 children taken, thousands of prisoners still held. 5, no sanctions relief for Russia. Maintain and strengthen sanctions to prevent regrouping. So that's what the Ukrainians want out of these negotiations. The Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs has stated that Russia will not make territorial concessions in Donetsk, Luhansk, Kherson, and Zaporizhia regions. The territorial structure of Russia is enshrined in the country's constitution. So they've been, it's interesting that Trump has taken the mickey out of Zelensky for deferring to the constitution of the country so that he can't give parts of the nation away. And Russia's doing exactly the same with the places that they've stolen and written into their constitution. But you don't hear Trump saying anything about Russia's reliance on constitutional arguments. So it's just complete double standards, I would have to say. So Russian Foreign Ministry gives a clear indication of Russia's readiness for peace ahead of the Trump-Putin meeting. The territorial structure of the Russia is enshrined in our constitution. That says it all. Therefore, regarding the goals of the Russian delegation in the meeting in Alaska, they are dictated solely by national interests. In other words, they're not going to concede any territory, even though Trump has clearly said that that's what he wants. Russia put illegally occupied Ukrainian territories into its constitution, violating international law. So a US official has said to Axios that if Trump's rhetoric sounds pro-Russian at times, which we all admit it does, it's because he believes that kind of public messaging will help him get a deal. Trump is still pissed off at Putin. He's really had enough, says this particular person. Take it with a pinch of salt. Even if diplomatic efforts fail, Trump will continue selling weapons to NATO for Ukraine. The general view for months is that we can bring down the Russian economy tomorrow. There are more ways to ruin Ukraine, but if he had to choose a side, Trump would start to bring down the Russian economy. Let's hope that that is where Trump is going. But then we hear, this is the latest, this is a Chris Owicki thread, saying the Trump administration is reportedly planning to cooperate with Russia in exploiting rare earth minerals in occupied regions of Ukraine. It is also said to be planning to offer Russia the chance to exploit Alaska's mineral resources and to ease aviation sanctions. So they are looking at easing sanctions, and they are looking at giving away Ukrainian rare earth minerals to Russia as a kind of way for them to get to a ceasefire, which is essentially giving Russia exactly what they want in the territories that they have stolen. It beggars belief, this. The Daily Telegraph newspaper reports that the US Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent has been promoting ideas on US-Russian economic cooperation to Trump ahead of Friday's summit. They are said to include US-Russian cooperation on mining Ukrainian mineral deposits, so that's nice, just giving away Ukrainian rare earth metals, lifting export bans on parts and equipment needed to service Russian aircraft, so lifting sanctions, and US-Russia cooperation on developing natural resources off the coast of Alaska, strengthening Russia's presence in the Bering Straits. The proposals are said to be a way of expediting a ceasefire agreement in a way that could be acceptable to Europe, according to a source. Quote, the sense is that it has to be presented to align with public opinion around this. It cannot be seen as a reward for Putin. These are all rewards for Putin. They really are. So let's go to Trump himself, who is speaking today.
Had a very good call. He was on the call. President Zelensky was on the call. I would rate it a 10, very, very friendly. We had a very good call. He was on the call.
So
President Zelensky
he spoke to Zelensky and rates it as a 10 out of 10 call, which is not unusual for him to be so bombastic. We have got reaction from both sides of the Atlantic following the video messages between Trump and pro-Ukraine leaders, says Tim White. It's remarkable how quickly Trump changes. Having listened to them, Trump suddenly seems to be reasonable again. First, he rated today's call first class, and then there are more clips of Trump from his long press conference. The US president is eager to conclude things almost instantly.
Say the second meeting, if the first one goes okay, we'll have a quick second one. I would like to do it almost immediately. And we'll have a quick second meeting between President Putin and President Zelensky and myself if they'd like to have me there.
So, and that sounds like that would happen in Anchorage. Am I right in saying that? And then this.
Agree to stop the war after your meeting on Friday.
Yes, they will. Yeah.
What will the consequences
There will be
be?
consequences.
Sanctions, tariffs?
There will be, I don't have to say, there will be very severe consequences, yes.
Agree to stop the
So he has said there will be very severe consequences, one presumes, for Russia if they don't agree to the peace deal. But then very quickly, psychologically, if you go on to a quick question after that, you don't want to dwell on that. He finds that uncomfortable. He wants to go on to the next question really quickly and points out another questioner. So that's worth understanding. And then this.
With Vladimir Putin Friday in Alaska,
Yeah.
do you believe you can convince him to stop targeting civilians in Ukraine?
Well, I'll tell you what, I've had that conversation with him. I've had a lot of good conversations with him. Then I go home and I see that a rocket hit a nursing home or a rocket hit an apartment building and people are laying dead in the street. So I guess the answer to that is no, because I've had this conversation. I want to end the war.
With Vladimir Putin.
So Greg Terry sent me this video earlier, and he was like, this is this is the truth of Trump. It finally comes out that he keeps saying he wants the killing to stop, and it's like, can you see that you can stop the killing of civilians? No, I can't. Well, okay. So all of those sanctions that you could put on, you're not really going to do that because you don't see this as it's just an absolutely bizarre excerpt from that press conference there. Pretty incredible. So from the European side, says Tim White, Chancellor Merz and President Zelensky have been answering questions. The main points are here. The insurmountable question is going to be conceding land, which Trump expects. So here are the points from Merz Zelensky. Ukraine is ready for talks on territorial issues, but starting from the contact line, there must be a ceasefire first, as we've heard. The central topic of Trump's meeting with Putin should be the ceasefire. Ukraine and partners agreed to 5 common principles. Among them is the right to integrate into NATO. Defense forces will not withdraw from Donbass in exchange for a ceasefire. Legal recognition of territories occupied by Russia is not discussed at all. Key issues regarding Ukraine's territories will be resolved at the leadership level. There must be security guarantees for Ukraine. Trump expressed support and readiness to participate. Trump suggested Zelensky to discuss joint steps after the summit with Putin. As Tim White says, I genuinely think Zelensky's best move is to say to Trump in private, peace cannot be achieved by rewarding the aggressor. You admire Churchill because of what he did. With the US, peace was achieved for the world. I will support your Nobel Peace Prize nomination if you support Ukraine and force peace. So again, a case of trying to manipulate Trump, but trying to massage his ego, I guess. Reaction from President Macron, who was on a video call with Trump and reassured that no decisions about Ukraine will be made without Ukraine at the table. And that's really important as well. Good to hear that. And not surprising, says Tim White, but Zelensky looked absolutely drained at the press conference with Merz today. So there we go. Anton Gerasenko just adds a couple bits here. So re-going over what we just said. 5 principles: ceasefire, reliable security guarantees for Ukraine. Russia cannot have a veto over Ukraine's European and NATO prospects. Sanctions against Russia must be in place, and they should be strengthened if Russia does not agree to a ceasefire in Alaska. Regarding Ukraine's territorial integrity, Zelensky said, without Ukraine, it's impossible to decide this. And by the way, everyone supports this. And that's where we're at. So we'll have to wait and see how it happens. But some interesting analyses there from James O'Brien and from the rest of his politics team. Trump is, and his unfortunately, his administration are fundamentally ignorant about knowledge of Ukraine and Russia. They're not relying on experts. There are no experts around them. And yet they're going to waltz into a meeting with Putin. Trump is, and I guess he's going to try and rely on vibes. We heard this from Fiona Hill previously, talking about how he doesn't do any preparation. When she was a security advisor in Trump 1.0, and he'd go on phone calls literally with Putin. He wouldn't really understand that Putin was taking a piss out of him with the language that Putin was using, got lost in translation with the translator. So Putin would actually be kind of laughing in Trump's face. Trump wouldn't realize that, but Trump would do absolutely no preparation for the calls and just rely on bombastic rhetoric and vibes, thinking that he could just win Putin over with his rhetoric and personality. It's just so naive. It's so childish. And that's probably where we're at with with this meeting in Anchorage on Friday. Anyway, that's enough from me. Thank you so much for your support. Take care, everybody, and I'll speak to you soon.